possible that if you are sitting in this room today, life has at some time or other broken your heart. There is a really famous sermon that's usually characterized as starting with a bunch of blesseds. Do you know that one? Well, one of the ways that we encounter it in modern language is that it calls us splendid. So today, my blessing for you is that you are splendid in your broken heart. You are splendid in your healed up heart with patches and tape, a little bit of staples here and there, right? A little bit of super glue. You are splendid. So the first person who's going to give us some insight into risk today, Pablo Picasso. He says, I am always doing that which I cannot do in order that I may learn how to do it. Isn't that great? One time I went with my parents to Key West, and we went to Ernest Hemingway's house. And Ernest, well, he had more than one house, but this house in Key West has the cats with all the extra toes, has this really cool bungalow situation going on, and his writing shack that you can't actually visit because it had a rickety walkway connecting it to the main house, and they don't want you to fall to your death. But then we went in the bathroom, which had black and white checkered tile, and at the very top of the cupboard, there was a ceramic cat. You know what the tour guide said about that cat? She said, oh, that cat was a gift from Pablo Picasso. And I was like, name dropper. But look, one of the things that he teaches us, one of the things that we know from his art, is that it comes from a place that you don't read from left to right. You don't predict it when you look at it. You encounter it. And that's the way risk kind of is. If you knew what it was, it would be a sure thing and not a risk. There was a person named Jean-Francois Gravelet. Fancy name, right? He was what is called a funambulist, or a tightrope walker. And he made his first professional appearance when he was 5 years old. The circus had come to town, and they inspired Jean-Francois with a great passion. And he started to practice tightrope walking right away. And he used his grandfather's fishing pole to balance. On June 30th, 1859, the little boy, now an adult, had the stage name Blondin. And he completed one of the most impressive feats of his career. He crossed over Niagara Falls on a tightrope. The paper on the American side of the falls, the Niagara Falls Gazette, first thought it was a hoax. And then they thought, Blondin must be not quite right, but they covered it anyway. The Niagara Mail, which was the newspaper on the Canadian side, said that Blondin was a fool and he should be arrested. Nonetheless, he crossed the 1,000-foot tightrope stretched over the river between two rowboats, even though it had a 60-foot sag in the middle and a steep slope. Other people would come after Blondin. They would change the event, arguably make it better, but Blondin would always be the first. The story of the determined funambulist can remind you that even when things are hard, even when they present a risk, one skill that will always help you is balance. Can you balance the experiences of the past with the demands of an undetermined future? I believe that you can. For example, you know that choosing a budget that has room for growth and expansion has been the topic of conversation these days. And it's true that that risk can seem too large. To combat those feelings of being unsure and only being able to base the decision on the past, I want to introduce you to the work of psychologist Phil Zimbardo. Zimbardo says that when it comes to balancing time, people tend to think of that tightrope walker, carefully putting one foot in front of the other. Actually, a lot of people tend to think that that kind of balancing is too hard, right? We don't usually decide to try tightrope walking. The thing is that it isn't just what people do with their time that gives people balance, but also how they think about time. Zimbardo says that a sense of balance comes from switching successfully between past, present, and future. The past of the UU congregation of Flint, as you look over even this year, is rich. A flourishing memorial garden, robust religious education, and the search committee planning and working for the future. And still, there remains quite a bit of work to be done. Consider this. In order to successfully cross over Niagara Falls, Blondin had to do one thing: keep moving. To remain in the past, either resting or trying to replicate the results of the past, would be to allow the past to hold you down as an individual and as a spiritual and ethical community. As you consider the next year before us, you will be offered many opportunities for growth, including chances to improve your skills at welcoming others and planning for growth, as opposed to planning for shrinking. Connections that come from the past and do not imagine new futures will only give you more of what you already have. Does that make sense? Sarah Lockwood Pardee was the daughter of wealthy parents. She was the belle of New Haven. Do you know where New Haven is? Connecticut? In 1862, Sarah married William Wirt Winchester. I'm really glad that my middle name is not Wirt. Who was the son of Oliver Fisher Winchester, the lieutenant governor of Connecticut, and the manufacturer of the Winchester repeating rifle. You are following along excellently. It was a gun that made a lot of money because it played an essential role in Western expansion and colonization. 4 years after they married, like the number 4, the couple's infant daughter, Annie, died of a disease that was not well understood. It's marasmus, or basically the baby couldn't gain weight. Sarah never really recovered from that loss. 15 years later, her husband died of tuberculosis much too soon. In her despair, Sarah consulted a spiritualist who told her that she was being haunted by people who were killed by Winchester rifles. The answer, they told Sarah, was to build a house for the spirits. As long as the house was under construction, she would stay alive. The story, fed by past grief, led to an extensive meandering monument. At the time Sarah died, the immense construction covered over 6 acres. The mansion contained 160 rooms, 2,000 doors, 10,000 windows, 47 stairways, 47 fireplaces, 13 bathrooms, and 6 kitchens. Sarah Winchester was certainly held down by more than just one thing. But her inability to think of a future not mandated or shaped by the past led to her being trapped and held down by the past in very specific ways. In the context of Phil Zimbardo's work, getting stuck in thinking or acting on any one mode of time, past, present, or future, can have negative effects. The remedy for all or nothing thinking, instead, is to work hard when there is a mission to be accomplished, but play hard when the work is done. This is probably something you can get your mind around, since you employ some version of that in your daily life. Unless you don't, then I'm coming to your house to eat dessert first. And yet, you may wonder how it is that challenging the time frames for your thoughts can make a difference. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put it this way: the end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponents into friends. It is this type of understanding goodwill that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of humanity. So, one way to achieve balance in that intense work that he did was to spend some time in that new future. And we've considered this congregation in the past. We've considered Sarah of Winchester in the past, and the possibility of a glad new age. And I have good news. The future is yours. It requires that you loosen your grip on it, and requires that you be willing to give up already knowing how things are going to go. It is worth saying specifically that it is all right if everything is not perfect. No one here is perfect. As a community, you will encounter your concerns together. Still, you've heard the myth of perfection with such insistence and such urgency that sometimes you can get confused and think that it's real. We have a mission to accomplish, and we will do it together. This is the moment in which I give you permission to take off your superhero costume and change back into street clothes, to leave your mask at home, and to show your real face. Yes? What about the present? Some of you probably put a seatbelt on every time you drive or ride in a car. This might be because you've internalized a very important maxim: safety first. To engage with this idea, let's first talk about the arrow. The Arrow Sutta is one of the manuals or texts for learning in Buddhism. The text urges us, as we are having human experiences, to avoid the second arrow, or to avoid adding to the original impact by making it worse or raising our expectations. For example, when something makes us happy, we are likely to wish in that moment that that experience would last much longer. When you think of the best meal you've ever eaten, the most beautiful thing you've ever experienced, the funniest thing you've ever come across, these are all things that change. One of the truths at the heart of Buddhist practice is the truth that nothing is permanent. Our inability to have that permanence affects all of our experiences. We can't rely on things as fixtures, and that tends to lend itself to lack of satisfaction. It's also true that pain and suffering don't last forever, but then neither does their resolution. These are the moments that are like being pierced by an arrow, having moments of joy or sorrow that carry with them an inescapable fragility. One thing that you can do about this, in response to this, is practice being present to the moment, and practice being present to the experiences that life offers you. As they change and flow, the arrow text is saying that you prevent shooting yourselves again with a second arrow when you meet these challenges or blessings or joys with even-mindedness, or what some people would call equanimity. You purposely decide that the circumstances outside of you won't throw you off balance. You won't get giddy or caught up in circumstances. You don't shoot the second arrow and then have to deal with the disappointment of continuing in a cycle of change. And even though you may try to practice even-mindedness, some tools for safety are kind of scary. I admit that at the outset. Jaws of life cuts through the metal bodies of cars. Heart defibrillators use huge jolts of electricity, but jaws of life can free trapped passengers. And heart defibrillators can restart hearts that have stopped with an immense jolt that would otherwise kill a person. And still, there are times we take the risks. But why? Jeanette Winterson uses a gambling metaphor to convey the sense of uncertainty with which we hold risk. You play, you win. You play, you lose, you play. It's the playing that's irresistible. Dicing from one year to the next with the things that you love. What you risk reveals what you value. It's because something really matters, because something important is at risk, that you take those chances. Now, one more story. Think about it this way. A company director goes off on an extended world tour, leaving the business in the hands of 3 deputies. Each was assigned a capital sum to be used for expansion of the company. The first was given $5 million, the second $2 million, and the third $1 million. The first used the capital to set up 5 new branches, and the second added new lines of products. The third put the money in the fund, where the interest just kept up with the rate of inflation. At last, the director came back from vacation, and the deputies were summoned to give their reports. The first presented pictures of the new branches. They'd been set up with the $5 million. The director said, "Well done, you've proved your worth. I'm going to make you a joint director with me in the firm." The second deputy showed the catalogs advertising the new lines. The director said, "Well done, you've proved you can do a good job. I'm putting you in charge of sales." The third deputy said, "I'm afraid I'm not up to performing the miracles you expect. Here's the audit to show that your money's been kept safe." Then, the director gave that deputy a scolding. "I don't pay you to sit on your backside. I expect miracles, do I? Well, I expected at the very least you would try your hand at the stock exchange and increase the capital. You're fired. My new joint director will take over your department. In this firm, those who show enthusiasm get ahead, and those who don't care about anything end up without anything. There's the door." Now, before you assume it, this story isn't about losing your place in community. What it's underscoring is the fact that you have to choose to risk to be able to fulfill your potential. Can you relate to that? Making the choice to risk is hard sometimes. Not knowing what will happen is hard sometimes. The underlying question is, can it be done? Can Blondin cross over Niagara Falls? Can we, as deputies, putting ourselves in that story perhaps, make any money with what we've been entrusted? The answer is yes. And Uncle Waldo says this: whatever you do, you need courage. Whatever course you decide upon, there is always someone to tell you you are wrong. There are always difficulties arising that tempt you to believe that your critics are right. To map out a course of action and follow it to an end requires some of the same courage that a soldier needs. Peace has its victories, but it takes brave people to win them.